Okay, it looks like we're now live streaming. Thank you, Nick, for that. Welcome everybody to this meeting of the Business Board. I'm pleased to welcome any members of the press and public who are able to join the virtual meeting online. The meeting is being held via Zoom and will be streamed on the Combined Authorities YouTube channel. If you have any technical difficulties during the meeting, please refresh your connection in the first instance. If it becomes apparent that we've lost members and aren't quorate, we might have to adjourn the meeting. But as we stand, we're quorate, so that's good. Just in terms of apologies for absence, we have had some, but I'll just go round the table to check the names of all the members of the Business Board in alphabetical order, just to establish their presence for the record. If you can just say yes that you're here when I call your name, starting with you, Vic.
Yes.
And Tina.
Yes.
Belinda.
Yes.
Lewis.
Yes.
Mike.
Yes.
Thanks, Mike. Faye.
Yeah.
Jason.
Yes.
Andy Neely. So Andy not with us at the moment. I think he's due to join us, but we will see. Nitin.
Yes.
Rebecca. Again, I think Rebecca is due to join us, but not with us at the moment. Andy Williams?
Yes.
Yes. Thanks, Andy. And myself, Alex Plant. So could the Democratic Service Officer report any apologies that we have received?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Amir Khalid, from Al Kingsley, from Mayor Dr. Johnson, and the Vice Chair is going to be joining slightly late. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Nick. And just for the record, and I think all Business Board members know this, but Mayor Dr. Nick Johnson is taking a period of medical absence and is having an operation later this week. So I'm sure you will join me in wishing Nick the very best of wishes for that operation, speedy recovery. And if we could just note that for the minutes, that would be good. So just moving to declarations of interest. Does anybody wish to declare any pecuniary interests or any other conflicts that they wish to declare now? Vic, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I do. Under 3.3, we're going to be discussing the LSIP, the Local Skills Improvement Plan. Because that's led by the Chambers of Commerce, I feel I should declare my interest in that. And if required, recuse myself if we do have the point raised. Perhaps Nick can tell me how I do that.
Yeah, thanks, Vic. That's noted. Nick, do you want to comment?
Sorry, Chair. I see Rob's got his hand up. I'm not sure if that's because he wanted to respond.
I think Rob's going to declare a different interest. I suppose just to pick up Vic's question, or Dom, did you want to come in?
I can pick that up, Chair, please. Thank you. So Vic, I don't. The paper's asking for the Business Board to note and endorse just to note the approach taken with the LSIP. So I don't think it's going to be an issue of conflict.
I think, yeah, if we got into a substantive discussion, Vic, I think, you've noted the conflict at the beginning. It might be, I'll judge it from the chair if we end up in a substantive discussion as to whether it makes sense for you to, hold yourself away from the discussion. But you say it's mainly a paper for noting, Dom, as you note, so it should be okay. Rob, over to you.
Yes, in item 3.4, you're looking at the University of Peterborough, including the two subsidiaries of the Combined Authority. I'm a director for the Peterborough Research and Development Company Limited. So I believe, be excusing myself if we go into private session.
Yeah, and just to note that I expect that we will go into private session for that item, Rob. So thank you for noting that in advance, and we'll expect you to leave during that discussion. Faye.
Just following on from Vic, so I sit on the board of the Cambridgeshire Chambers of Commerce, so I'm exactly in the same position as 3.3.
Yeah, noted. Thank you, Faye. And Rebecca?
I have an interest in item 2.2, which is the South Fens Enterprise Park.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. And again, I think if we get into a substantive discussion on that item, it would be good if you sort of recused yourself from the conversation. Okay, thank you everybody for noting that. And I'd like to start then by welcoming Gordon Mitchell. And all of you, I think, will know Gordon as the Interim Chief Exec of the Combined Authority. Gordon, would you like to firstly just introduce yourself, and thanks again for being with us, and also maybe just say a couple of words on the improvement plan which you've been leading, and the link across the business board.
Okay, certainly, Alex. A few words might not do it, but I'll try my best. So good to meet so many of you. I mean, quite a few for the first time. You probably know I've been around about 3 or almost 4 months now, and I really came in with a brief to do 2 big things, I think. One was to begin to put right some of the things that haven't been working well or went wrong. And it's not that I found these. Lots of people already realized that things weren't in a number of areas going well. And I think the second thing is then to reorientate some of the work of the Combined Authority towards what it really needs to do much better, which is about being clear about the priorities for the patch and organizing itself to promote those to different networks, and particularly to government, in a much more strong way than seems to be the case just recently. The improvement work really was crystallized through a report, quite a substantive report that went to board in October. It was meant to go in September, but because of the Queen's death and mourning period, it was postponed 3 or 4 weeks. But in that extensive document, there's an analysis of why things have ended up where they are, sketches out a range of the things that need to improve, and begins to talk about how to do that. And part of the process is an officer group that's a program board that's working in 6 strands of work, and chief executives from the local authorities are associated with each of these strands as well. So that issue about being much closer to the local authorities for some of our work is embedded into every part of this. But the top issues for the Combined Authority overall are being much clearer on exactly where the Combined Authority adds value, what the specific role of the Combined Authority is, because it's clearly not just the 7th local authority. It needs to add value to all the other sectors that are in play. So clarity on the role, clarity on the overarching strategy, because that's missing at the minute, and then aligning the effort and resources behind that. Now that clearly sounds very straightforward, because shouldn't any organization do that? But it does seem that those things have been a bit eroded or thin in recent times. But there are ways of doing this. One is around putting all the operational stuff right. Second is about adjusting the structure, and the principal change around that is creating a strategy, policy and public affairs team around the centre to support the chief exec and mayor. And in the operation, beginning to think about CPCA as one body, rather than a number of different silos of activity that too often operate separately. In all of that, you'll know from other discussions that we initiated some external support to think about the role and operation of the business board as it moves forward over time. That, for me, that is connected to this issue of one CPCA, one voice for the area that people get behind from all sectors. But you'll also know that the government has been making proposals about the future of LEPs across the country, and that is very much in tune with the starting point for the review. That in other areas where the LEPs are not inside combined authorities, the proposal is to come in and be more integrated in the work of the mayoral combined authorities. And that all seems a good idea and a good way forward. The slightly tricky thing, of course, that's cropped up much more recently to do with national financial issues is that there's a very clear nudging towards a situation where the core funding for LEPs looks like not being guaranteed for the future. And in these weeks where the government is looking at where it's going to protect resources or reduce them, quite specifically, the government has said to combined authorities across the country about the possibility of bringing that forward, and that the future funding might be found from within the combined authority. Exactly where that comes from is not crystal clear, because there's no other new forms of income. But it does mean that the review that we've been initiated, and I know some of you have been involved in discussions in the last 2 or 3 weeks, is in tune with national developments. But the end game is about trying to increase the effectiveness of the CPCA in total in championing the area and securing investment for the most important things in our patch. Alex, I think that's probably all for me to say by way of intro, maybe.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Gordon. Obviously, as a matter of public record, the CPCA board accepted your report and all its recommendations unanimously. It's probably just worth adding, which was an
very
important
pleased
part.
to hear that people read it from beginning to end. Congratulations.
Yeah, well, yeah. I certainly did, but that was a very important part of that, enabling the combined authorities to move forward, and then links in, as you say, to how we ensure that as a business board we're positioning ourselves for the future in a way that helps the combined authorities to be a success and deliver what's needed for the people and businesses of our area. And we'll continue those conversations with Gordon and with the combined authority board as a whole as we move through into the next phases. So yeah, I think that's fine, Gordon. Thank you for giving that intro. I hope colleagues have found that useful and a chance to sort of hear from Gordon for a first time, but it's the beginning of a discussion rather than the end. So more to come. Thanks, Gordon. Great. Okay, I'll move back to agenda. It takes us to the minutes of our September meeting. We're asked to approve the minutes of the meeting that were held on the 12th of September. Can I ask whether anyone disagrees with the proposal to approve the minutes? And I see no hands raised as objections, so we'll take that as carried. And as I said at the beginning, I think we as we move into the rest of the agenda, we do have a request to discuss the exempt appendix under item 3.4. So we will take that at the end of the agenda when we move into the exempt session. I'm assuming that at the moment I have no one wishing to raise issues around the exempt appendix under 2.2. But just to check whether anybody wishes to raise points under the exempt appendix on 2.2. Okay, so I can see no hands on that one. So I'm assuming we'll be able to take that one in the normal order, but we'll take an item on 3.4 at the very end. That takes us on to 2.1, the budget and performance report. I'd like to welcome our new finance manager, Riyadh Bortali, who will present the budget and performance report. So Riyadh, over to you.
Apologies, Chair, but Riyadh tested positive for COVID this morning, so is unable to join us.
Sorry. Thanks, Rob. Are you going to help us out?
I'm going to do my best. Obviously,
Thank
I
you.
found out this morning as well, but I have seen the report. So this is, of course, the regular update you will get every meeting on the finances in your area that are under your control, and a few of the areas that you've requested to maintain sight of that sit outside, such as market towns and the energy hub. I'll just do a very brief run through because the paper's been circulated. Grant funding definitely remains behind profile. In fact, there hasn't been any income yet this year. In two of those cases, the LEP core funding and the Growth Hub grants, that's due to a temporary pause on funding, which has been previously reported to the board relating to concerns raised by the CPCA's auditors. As I'm sure Gordon has spoken before, this is relating to the ongoing improvement plan, and we're continuing to engage both with government and our auditors to ensure that's resolved in a timely and effective manner. And we're still confident that we will be receiving those grants. In terms of the ESF and ERDF grants, these are both ones that are delivered via a service contract with the Growth Co. You'll see later on that the expenditure on Growth Co that is related to these is also lagging significantly behind. As the report says, this is partially due to the programme itself being behind, but also somewhat behind in terms of the actual claim documentation coming through. So delivery has happened and is occurring, and those claims are now flowing through from the Growth Co's contractor to Growth Co, and then from Growth Co to CPCA, at which point we can then claim them. As it sounds, it's a bit bureaucratic, so there is a bit of delay built in there, but we are aware that this is behind where we'd like to be, and it's being pushed now. On the enterprise zone receipts, these are agreements with the local collection authorities, so our constituent councils. They collect the receipts in 1 year. They then have to get those audited and confirmed by central government, and once those amounts are confirmed, they pay the amounts over to the CPCA. So there's no concern currently that we won't receive those funds. It's simply a question of timing, and there's been a bit of a delay from central government for reasons we can probably all appreciate over getting those finalised. On the expenditure side, as you can see from table 2, the vast majority of the spend in this area, over 5 million of a total 5.8 million, is on the Growth Co. Those are the ERDF and ESF grants predominantly, which are suffering from the same issue. Dom is already providing, I believe, Dom, are you providing the report later on Growth Co delivery? So that will go into more detail then.
Steve.
In terms of table 3, which is those areas that you've asked to be kept cited on, most of these relate to the Net Zero Hub, where, as has previously been well documented, there is a delay on the LAD2 retrofit programme. Government have been kept briefed and are well aware. That project's now come to an end as of the end of September, and we expect final outturn figures to be ready early December. Local authority delivery phase 3, so the follow-on from that, along with the home upgrade grant, are now starting to delivery, and you can see spend against both of those. Both of those are fairly short programs. They end currently in March 2023, so we should see some fairly rapid acceleration of spend on those, as they were only in there for the 6 months. The capital budgets then. You're probably much more familiar with these, as they are the bread and butter of what the business board do and the decisions you make regularly. There's a few lines in here which haven't spent because they've only been approved in the last few months, and indeed I signed off the first claim for Barn 4 specialist growing this morning, so they are on their way getting those grants in place and starting to claim. Outside of that, the Growth Co service is a bit behind in terms of giving out its capital grants. Those are also coming through. I've co-signed off on several of those this week as well, so that is starting to catch up. And you will receive a more detailed update about the programme as a whole by Steve in a later item. Can you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
Okay, apologies for that. Table 5, which is the capital side of the energy and the market towns programme. On the energy side, you're seeing very much the same as on the revenue, with LAD2 starting to accelerate through its planned delivery. That spend is, while the project's completed, we're still getting the claims in, and so expenditure will continue for a couple of months still. And those phase 3 and home upgrade grants, these figures are as of the end of August, and the project only started September 1st, so the capital grant spend hasn't kicked in yet, but that will start to come in your next few reports. On the market town side, as it says in the budget, there's various impacts being seen across the CPCA area on all of these projects around COVID and inflationary costs, meaning people are reevaluating their business plans before hitting the go button. And that's reflected in the reduction in the forecast outturn spend for this year by just over 3.5 million. There's a update to that paper due on the November CA board, which will go into more detail, but you're lucky enough to have Dom, who's the programme lead here, if you do have any specific questions ahead of that. None of those, I think the vast majority of those are profiling differences, so the spend is delayed rather than significant underspend expected across the programme.
That's correct, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Rob.
And then section 6 is your regular review of where you are in terms of your money going in and out. So the first table shows you the recycled growth funds. So those are the project funds given out as loans, where repayment is therefore profiled and expected. There's no major changes since the position reported last board meeting. You can see at the bottom line of that, which is the combined revenue and capital, that there's about £2.5 to £3 million over the next couple of years that the business board has at its disposal to allocate to new projects as you see fit. And then over the longer term, there's a continued stream coming in of some long-term loans totaling about another 2 to 3 million that come over the next 10 to 15 years. Enterprise zone receipts, last item, and then I'll be quiet for a bit. These are, as mentioned, a bit behind this year, but still expected to come in. The forecasts shown there show that the business board have quite a sizable annual budget that they have at their disposal. So it ramps up over the next couple of years as we go into the second 5-year of the agreements, where the share of rates changes slightly and a couple more of the sites are expected to come online with investment and therefore business rate growth. And really that's just showing you that you've got £600,000 a year roughly of revenue to allocate to meet your strategic objectives. That's a very quick whiz through. Happy to answer questions or indeed field them to my colleagues.
That's great. Thank you, Rob, and thank you for stepping in at short notice to cover for Riyadh, and we all hope he recovers from COVID soon. Do colleagues have any questions they want to raise on the report and the points that Rob's just run through for us? And I would just note that the point you finished on, Rob, is quite an important one, in that the expectation of enterprise zone receipts going forward, and that being an available source of funding to fit with the economic growth strategy and its delivery is quite an important issue for us going forward. Yeah, that was just one thing that struck me. But I've got Belinda and Tina. So Belinda first.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you. That was very clear, Rob. Thank you so much, and very helpful report. Can you just walk us through the pathway of consequences of where we are now? Because obviously there are people who are grant holders who are underspent, and then there's the impact on the combined authority itself. And there's going to be implications at a number of levels there. Can you just talk us through what the levers are around consequences of where we are and what should keep us awake at night as a business board, please?
Was there any particular programme, or did you want a sort of holistic?
It was more holistic. I mean, I'd suggest we don't spend time going into every single project, because I'm sure there are mitigating circumstances, for all of them. But it's really more the pathway of consequences for where we are that I'm concerned about or interested in.
Okay, so where the business board finds itself now, though, the vast majority of its funds are either recycled or being flowed through the gain share of the combined authority. So it's no longer subject to specific time constraints, which the board, those who've been around a few years, are much more used to with the local growth funds that had a hard deadline. So there's no immediate timing concerns when it comes to delayed spend. Of course, we're all aware that inflation's currently at double digits, just about. So any delay in spend will cause a pressure on projects from an inflationary perspective. As a funding body, that risk should never be transferred to the business board. It should always remain with the project delivery body. Of course, in practice, that might mean that projects may fail or may have to reduce their scope and bring back change requests to the business board to consider a revised scope. But there are not, for any of the business board's current funds, concern of loss due to delays. Is that what you were looking for?
Maybe I'll pick up some more details a bit later on, but for now that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Belinda. And Tina?
So I was just coming from the other end, which is, you know, we haven't really had any discussion about how we are going to spend these strategic funds. And that will need to be done, otherwise they'll just accumulate. So we need to do that probably starting at an offline meeting.
Yeah, I'll pick that one up, Rob. You're absolutely right, Tina. And it links almost to the enterprise zone receipts point I was making, is that, and it does link back to Rob's point, that these, as we think about the forward look, we've actually got a different context, because these aren't time limited funds in the way that they were before, and also some of them are freer for us to choose how we deploy them. My assumption is we'd want to deploy them in the service of the agreed position on the implementation plan for the economic growth strategy, but that is a process that we are still in the midst of and is not concluded yet. So you're right, Tina, we need to come back to that conversation, and we should be setting ourselves an approach that allows us to have an agreed position as a business board as to how we're deploying those funds to hopefully deliver those agreed goals in the economic growth strategy. I think that it's a conversation we need to have in the future. So we'll be picking that up in our subsequent discussions as a business board, I think. Rob, did you want to add anything on that?
No, that sounds entirely right to me. They really are there currently at the business board's discretion. The thing I've said to the CA board recently goes just as much for the business board. We're going from a period of relatively high funding to an era of much lower funding, nationally as well, but certainly for local enterprise partnerships, there's been no replacement to the local growth funds. So these recycled funds from previous good decision making are what's there. So it's trying to do more with less, as I'm sure the government may well say on Thursday.
Yeah. I think you've been writing speeches for the Chancellor, Rob, clearly. I think it also actually dovetails with some of the points that Gordon was alluding to in the improvement plan generally. So, you know, that this is the world we're moving into. So yeah, absolutely right, Tina. We need to come back to that point. So I see no other questions on this report. The recommendation for us is just to note that the year-to-date financial position relating to the revenue and capital funding lines within the Business and Skills Directorate for this financial year. And as it is just a recommendation to note, can I assume that we all agree that it has indeed been noted? So I see nods, so thank you. We can note that one. And thanks again, Rob, for picking that one up. That takes on to item 2.2 on the Strategic Funds Management Review. And I did raise this at the very beginning, but just to check again whether any member wants to move into private session due to the exempt appendix that it contains, which is exempt from publication under Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, in that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed, and information relates to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding the information. Just to check, does any member of the business board wish to discuss the content of the exempt appendix? So I see no one indicating. Thank you for that. In which case we can take this item forward. And Steve Clark, you're going to present the highlights from the report.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair and Board. So this is the usual update report that we bring. This covers progress on strategic funding to 21st of October. I'll run through the highlights in the front part of the paper first, and then I'll come back to circle back to the change request at the end. So in terms of project spend, obviously you've just seen from paper 2.1 comprehensive analysis of where we are on the overall budgets and process. I'll just pick out a few highlights in this part of the project. So spending from the original Local Growth Fund programme, which closed as of March 2021, where we capital swapped what was unspent, the actual spend today is 142.2 million from the original 146.7. So spend is slowly going through there to complete that original spend. GBF is all fine, invested in the University Phase 2, and the recycled is committed to Phase 3 of the University Community Renewal Fund. That's on track to be all spent in the two projects it's delivering, the Turning Point project and the Start and Grow project. within Growthworks by the end of 31st December, although there is quite a high focus on those to get that through by the end of the year. At 3.5, the table there shows the recycled LGF currently invested out by the business board, and shows some spend progress to date against some of those particular projects. Part 4, which is monitoring, the table 2 at part 4 shows just the live projects that are currently in spend mode there, with the outputs, forecast and the actuals today. Obviously, some of those still quite low because they're actual projects in delivery now, and many of their outputs follow. In terms of monitoring of all projects and the whole portfolio of projects, I know you usually get a rather detailed appendix to the report. You haven't got it this time because we've switched to a quarterly monitoring review. We were doing it monthly. That's become rather labour intensive within the team, and actually some of the projects do not move very much in terms of reporting outputs on a monthly basis. Some are very long term. So we've moved to quarterly. What that means is we don't have full data for you at this point, but we are proposing to work through with the board members some ways we may show this data going forwards, and we'll do that at the next activity update meeting to get your input on that, and then bring back that comprehensive overview of the whole programme next cycle. Part 5, the Recycled Local Growth Fund. Obviously, you've awarded to 6 projects this year, and as Rob indicated in 2.1, there's circa 3 million still to be allocated. There's actually more like 4 million if the project change request is formalised today to the Combined Authority Board. So we could be looking at 4 million, and the enterprise zone receipts has been mentioned. I'm proposing here in the paper that we do exactly what Alex has mentioned, that at the next activity update, we have a bit of a discussion about what the board's plans should be in terms of targeting strategy with that money, and then we can bring it back formally to the next business board cycle. Section 6 covers off all the other strategic funds that we have in play at the moment. I'm not going to go through all of those individually. Obviously, the paper provides an update on each of those, and I'm very happy to take questions on any of those as we go. Obviously, the only thing I would say about those other funds is we're obviously hoping to hear from DLUHC next week after the autumn statement on how our Levelling Up Round 2 bid, or Peterborough's Levelling Up Round 2 bid did, and the big transport bid within the Combined Authority, and also hoping to hear about our UK SPF outcome there as well. One thing I will add that isn't in the paper, we submitted an EOI, expression of interest, to UK Research and Innovation last week, and this is in reference to trying to secure an innovation launchpad for 7.5 million of innovation grants for SMEs. So that's just to record that for the board. I'm going to pause there and just see if there's any questions on any of that I've just mentioned before moving on to the change request.
Yeah, thanks for that, Stephen. I think it's best if we do that and pick up any generic points around the first set before we come back to the project change request specifically. Just one from me while colleagues are pondering whether they've got any questions around what you've just presented. Well, firstly, I should just say, yeah, thanks, Steve, for noting that we're going to think about the best means of presenting this so we can get something that's succinct, clear, allows the business board to track progress and ask questions, but you know, is not too voluminous, in line with a general desire to sort of move us to a kind of as efficient a way of business as we possibly can get to. The question I had though, just around on 6.8, you've got the reference to the Create Growth funds.
Yep.
Just let you get there. I just wanted to check: is that confirmed, secure? Like, in New Anglia's bank account, or is it still potentially subject to changes from Thursday?
No, as I understand it, in terms of the relayed information that we've had from New Anglia, it is confirmed. And
Great.
press releases have been, I believe, literally in the last few days, have been circulating out, confirming that it's been a successful partnership.
Great, that's good news. So there's some positive stuff to come through that, and it would be good to track how that then translates, obviously, particularly from our point of view across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough.
Yeah, I will do.
Any other questions? Thanks, Steve. Any other questions for Steve on the sort of first section of the paper before we come to the project change request? I can see no other indications. So, Steve, do you want? Oh, sorry, Tina. Yeah, do come in. Sorry, it's really helpful if you do electronic hands. I can't see everybody.
Yes, I couldn't find it. Yeah, I just wondered about the innovation launch pad. What if that's successful, what does it mean, and how will it be administered? Will that be a business board, something that the business board will be involved in, or is it separate?
Yeah, thanks, Tina. Yeah, the bodies who were invited to submit were LEPs, mayoral combined authorities, and higher tier local authorities. So it will be led by the combined authority if we secure the money. But very, very clearly, we will work with partners. By the way, I should have added, sorry, I spoke about our own EOI, which is to do with materials and manufacturing, is our focus. We've actually provided support as a partner to the New Anglia expression of interest for an agri-tech launchpad as well. So we've backed two, really, in a way, there. So our own, yes, we will be administering it, but obviously we will work closely with partners to develop the cluster. The purpose of this is to develop the cluster further around particular sectors, and we've chosen the manufacturing materials sector.
Just very specifically to pick up Tina's question, though, Steve, is I'd imagine that the business board would be a critical player into how we would make the most of this funding if we were awarded it.
Yeah, correct. Sorry, yes, I meant that implicitly when I say combined.
Of course.
So, yes.
Yeah, as part of the combined authority, the business board would be playing in. Yes, gotcha. Okay. Thanks, Steve. That's great. Any other questions on those aspects? Otherwise, Steve, I'll ask you to talk at the generic level about the project change request and the recommendation that you have made there to not accept that. Oh, sorry, Rebecca, did you want to come in first on the first front end?
No, only to just say I will. I'm allowed to listen, but I won't take part in this next bit about the project change request due to my conflict that I mentioned at the beginning.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. That's great. Yeah, as understood. Thank you. So, Steve, with you.
Yeah. So, as was reported at the last business board meeting, Fenland District Council have the project which was obviously being delivered theoretically at the South Fens Enterprise Park. This was expansion of the facility. And they were awarded 997,000 of local growth fund in 2020. There were delays from the original plans. They put two parts of the scheme together, and recent conversations have now thrown up that whilst they've managed to go forward and get planning permission for the two phases put together, there is a massive cost difference in delivering that, and tenders that they've put out have come back and confirmed that position. So so they've reported a significant gap in funding to be able to deliver the project, and that means the quoted cost now has taken the combined phases up to 5.5 million with a funding shortfall of 4.6 million, which Fenland have not been able to outline where that would come from within their budget. So The project change request was attached as an exempt appendix for the board members, and it obviously details options that have been considered by Fenland District Council and its members. And we as officers have obviously worked through those options with them. Our conclusions are that the project is now so far behind its original delivery date, and with outcomes and outputs looking increasingly undeliverable, the confidence is not high that any of the options that they proposed in their change request would actually substantially reduce the costs in the current climate. So our recommendation is, as officer recommendation is for the board to reject the change request.
Great, thank you, Steve. That's very clear. Any questions from colleagues on that particular point around the recommendation on the change request? Steve, I can't see anyone indicating, in which case I think we can just move to the recommendations. The second of which is to note all the programme updates outlined in the paper, which I'm assuming everyone is comfortable to note. I've got nods, so thank you for that. The first of which is to recommend that we decline the project change request from the South Fens Enterprise Park project, and therefore for funding to be clawed back in line with this existing grant arrangement. Our business board members are also content to accept that first recommendation. Again, I've got nods around the table, so and no dissent. So that's consensus in support of the recommendations. Just to check, no one is disagreeing. Okay, can't see any raised hands, so that's fine. Thank you. So, Steve, we're going to stick with you. I think is Nigel ready to join us for the next item on 3.1 around growth works and the update for July to September 2022?
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair and board.
Hi, Nigel. Good to see you. So I'll hand over to Steve and Nigel to present what is a bit of a beast of a paper, but to hopefully steer us through that, and then we can open up for discussions afterwards. So, Steve, are you opening?
Yes, that's if that's okay. I'll open up, and then obviously Nigel can help contributing. I'm planning on taking the paper in two parts again, like before. I think if I just concentrate on the current performance in the Q7 delivery, and then we can go into the part about review and proposed changes. So first up, so this paper obviously notes performance for what we call Q7, but that's actually Q3 of this second calendar year in the programme, and covers the period July to September. This paper has already been to the Skills Committee last Monday, and was unanimously approved for recommendation to the CA board. So the GrowthWorks programme performance is attached to the report at Appendix 1, quite a detailed appendix which provides analysis for each of the service lines within the actual programme. But the table at 2.2 in the paper actually shows the headline output performance for the project, and the actual headline performance outputs are measured in jobs, which includes apprenticeships, and it's a key contract deliverable for each of the contract lines, but obviously each of the service lines has a number of measurable key indicators that sit underneath these. So in terms of performance, growth coaching, obviously showing 934 jobs is slightly only slightly under where it should be, but not too far off. But that hides some of the other issues that we have potentially with growth coaching. Inward investment is ahead of schedule. Apprenticeships is obviously quite clearly behind in the year 2 target, and grants and equity marginally behind, but quite a lot of stuff is looking good in terms of the pipeline and performance. So the summary at the bottom is that by this point we would be looking at 3/4 of 2,640, and we're obviously 1,000 short. So we're potentially if you look at the graphs in the appendix, it doesn't look too far off on the jobs, but as I say, that belies other issues in the streams. So, I mean, there are obviously the key challenges, though, reside with the skills line and the growth coaching, because they're the lines with volume heavy activity, with only 5 quarters left to go. So just a quick mention on customer satisfaction. We use a net promoter score, which is independently surveyed, and the score for Q7 was 62%, which is classed as excellent. Although it's a less than last quarter, which was world class, it still follows previous quarters to that, which were in the excellent bracket. So a quick commentary on each of the service lines. So skills, at the end of Q7, the skills service line performance levels were certainly not as expected and were well behind. They're behind on most of the leading indicators within their work. It's noted that the current key account management process that the service line has been trying to deliver has not necessarily been yielding the results that we wanted. They have recently undertaken a very large broad engagement campaign targeting 32,000 decision makers, but obviously we're yet to see the results of that coming through, but initial indications are that it's potentially still not having the effect. Obviously the skills side of it is in a tricky place, because the market is starting to highlight that there is a need to look for talent as opposed to just developing skills, and so they're in a position where you know, what they're offering should at the moment be, but it's just the way it's being positioned. Fliss is on the meeting with us, and we'll be able to add a bit more obviously on skills as required. Growth coaching, as is mentioned, at the end of Q7, growth coaching had achieved 1,073 jobs against an expected target of being a trend of 1,189, so not too far behind. But our prediction is that if they continue as is constituted, they're likely to land on around 1,900 jobs, which is 59% of the 3,223 contract target. What we're not seeing with the growth coaching is we're not seeing companies move from initial engagement necessarily, from undertaking a diagnostic to moving into a coaching journey. Although we're seeing a reduction in those coming in at the top end of the popper, actually. But we're seeing less companies follow through in the coaching journey. Journeys typically taking longer. I think these are signs that the market, that businesses are becoming slightly less interested in direct coaching and more interested in other aspects of their business. The inward investment continues to substantially over-deliver on all metrics. 627 jobs that this was created against an expected target of 261. They've got a pipeline of 200 companies and significant opportunity with the right kind of resource to land those. Grants and equity, as I've already mentioned, the prediction we have is that they should be able to achieve their target. They are currently, they will deliver somewhere around 1,000 by the contract end. Sorry, lost my place there a little bit. So the grants and equity line, we think, obviously, dwindling pot, we're looking to target higher quality grants that achieve the actual, have a higher ratio of jobs in them. The equity service was obviously delayed in starting. That's had an impact, as yet to obviously deliver. But that's now up and running with a restart being led by Gately, and we expect to see some of those first investments coming before the investment panel in Growthworks before the end of this month. I shall pause there just to take any questions on performance. Also invite Nigel to add anything on performance at this point if he wishes.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Nigel, do you want to come in and add anything to Steve on the performance section?
Not the performance. So if there's any questions, we'll respond to those, Chair.
Great, thanks, Nigel. Tina.
So about the apprenticeships, what sort of help do people get? I've just had a question from a colleague about apprenticeships, and I wondered what sort of help people get and why we think there's not the uptake that we'd like to see.
Shall we take all three first set of questions, and then I'll get Nigel and or Steve to respond. So first question on apprenticeships from Tina. Faye.
I have a slew of questions, if you don't mind, so just if you can capture them. The first one, as noted, about companies not favouring coaching. I think this is pretty consistent. Anyone that's talking to our businesses will know that they want to drive business growth. So my question is, we need to be able to pivot quicker. How can we do that? We do a fair bit of liaison with the Inward investment team, and they are really strong. So I believe that we should be focusing on areas where we are driving real growth. However, I don't believe that we should be changing figures in areas that we're not succeeding. We should be looking at how we can make them succeed if we deem them to be the right focus areas initially. And then my third comment is around recruitment, which kind of links with the first one. Reduction of job targets. We need to be filling these jobs. So we've known, at least for the last 12 months, recruitment's a fundamental issue. So I want to see more work on that, not reduction of job targets. And my final point is around the Equity Growth Service. Actually, I think there's some really exciting things that can be done around there with some of our tech and innovative startups, so I'm really keen that we put quite a lot of emphasis on that.
Great, thanks, Faye. And I'll come to Mike, and then I'll ask Nigel and Steve to come back to all those points. Mike.
Thanks. So just a sort of general question really as to whether what we're seeing with GrowthWorks here is consistent with what other growth hubs have been seeing in terms of the take up of services and the skills. So it's really whether it's our delivery of it or whether it's a sort of almost like an endemic change of attitude. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Mike. So quite a wide range of questions there for you guys. Who wants to kick off?
Maybe we suggest that Fliss takes the apprenticeship one, if this is still on. That was the first question.
I am, yeah, happy to do that. Apologies, I'm at City College Peterborough and connection is not good, so I'm going to keep my camera off in the hope that you will be able to have my audio. We can
hear you really well, Fliss, so that's good. Keep going.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So Tina, in terms of apprenticeships, the support that companies get is navigating what opportunities there are through apprenticeships. So there's no additional financial support. It's really talking and walking companies through the opportunities, the different standards that are available, linking them up with training providers, and just providing that additional support. So there isn't anything in terms of monetary incentive. The issue we have, and it seems to be across Cambridgeshire as a whole, actually, we lag behind the rest of the country in apprenticeship uptake. And so there's, I guess, an educational piece, both in terms of employers, but also with providers as well, to make sure that we get the offer right. So as well as supporting individual businesses, there's also, I guess, an awareness issue for us within the combined authority to find a better way of selling, I guess, promoting, building into businesses, talent pipelines, how apprenticeships can support businesses on a longer term trajectory.
Fliss, just one follow-up question for me on that. Do we know what you made the comment about the fact that uptake is lower in Cambridgeshire than other parts of the country? Do we know what the root causes of that lower take-up?
We don't specifically know. There are some sectors where I think apprenticeships work better than other sectors. We've seen a huge drop-off in level 2 apprenticeships in the combined authority, more so than in other areas as well.
So it's work that we're trying to do with businesses, with providers, making sure that we got the right offer. But we do lag behind the rest of the country, hence why GrowthWorks have those targets to try and encourage the promotion and uptake of apprenticeships.
Yeah, and it just feels to me that if we could get under the skin of the why, then our ability to target the funds we have to address that lower than we wish take up, then we have a better chance of spending the money in the right areas rather than potentially sort of fishing.
Yeah,
it sounds
agreed.
like you've got that underway, but... Yeah, go on, sorry.
I lost that, sorry, but there are fundamental challenges with the levy. That's why Labour have said that they would change how the levy is constructed. So there are ongoing challenges with the levy, but that's the same for everybody. So yeah, agreed. There needs to be more work around regional challenges of the uptake of apprenticeships.
Okay, thanks, Fliss. Nigel, do you want to pick up some of Faye's points, perhaps?
Yeah, I was going to actually say for Steve to pick up some of these specific ones, because then there were some more general ones which I'd cover.
Okay, well, between you as you see fit. Yeah.
Okay, so the point about favouring coaching, yes, that's been recognised, and in the review and further parts of the paper, you'll see that part of the proposed recommendations does pivot some activity away from coaching, and the ERDF grant, we're putting in a project change request which changes the focus on that as well, so it goes broader than just coaching that it can be used for. So that's a key part as well. But I do entirely agree. It's circumstances, macro environment is driving certain behaviours. Absolutely agree with the inward investment. I think that we all recognise that from our managing of the programme that has been massively successful, but has massive opportunity, and it can make an effect in certain places where perhaps some other parts of the programme is not making a difference. Landing a company into a particular place that creates new jobs, which would take a long time by organic growth in other ways. So, and then on the equity side, because the relaunch of the equity service has only just happened, we're very, very keen to work through all the stakeholders in Cambridgeshire, and especially those who are running funds or are coordinating the promotional support of other funds, because it is a co-investment. So would welcome, Faye, if you've got any ways of linking us up to some of those tech companies or other funds that are targeting those, then now's the time for us to do that.
I've probably pick up on Mike's question first regarding Growth Hub to Growth Hub comparisons. If you think about just the Growth Hub, Steve may have more evidence, but it's probably more word of mouth and verbal than actually fact-based in terms of how our Growth Hub compares to everybody else's. But I think our Growth Hub actually does pretty well performance-wise. Just want to remind everybody that GrowthWorks itself is quite unique in the country. So we have these 5 service lines all coming together to be kind of bouncing off each other, providing services with coaching at its core, sort of doing a triage, which then leads down to various offers. And I think going back to Faye's point about pivot, that's exactly what we're trying to do with the second part of what we were talking about this afternoon, in that if you go back to the original hypotheses of those service lines, and the fact that the focus was going to be on the top 1,000 growth companies out of 37,000 companies in the region, I think one of the challenges that we're seeing is that in that top, firstly, identifying what truly is the top 1,000, given what's happened with COVID and the macroeconomics that Steve referred to in the last 12 months. And that's the conversion rate we're getting out of that top 1,000. Even if we can establish who they are, again, the conversion rate seems to be challenging. And that may be because some of those companies are of a size where they feel they don't need coaching. So there might be, if you go back to the original hypotheses that all 1,000 would be open to coaching, that seems to be questionable. So I just wanted to make that point. And also just looking through the hypotheses as they were set out, originally way back in 2020, a lot has changed, and a lot of where the focus is for companies is different than it was. And so I think that being said, and I think the other, I'd like to really reinforce Steve's point, the Faye you raised as well, inward investment clearly is a strength of the programme, and given what we see on the pipeline, we would be crazy, I think, to turn our back on that opportunity, because it certainly is a flourishing opportunity for us, and I feel pretty confident on the equity line that we'll have no problem with that at all. And Steve said working with the board members to help flush out some of those opportunities will be really helpful. And in the round, I think the other point I think Faye you made is not sacrificing the targets, and I think that's a fair comment. I think we may run into contractual issues around that if we look at moving money away from one service line to another. So I think that might be something we have to bear in mind, but maybe Steve can make a comment on that. So those would be my kind of sort of more holistic comments. I see Mike's still with his hand in the air, so I'm not sure that's still a...
Mike, do you want to come back in? I think there's a new hand.
It is a new hand, my left hand. I guess the one point is, and I'm not sure how much has been addressed, is that by moving more towards the inward investment and to a certain extent to the equity, we're changing the profile of the companies that we're supporting. And I wonder, in terms of whether that's geographically or the types of business or sectorally, whether that's been recognised or examined in any way as to whether the profile of our investment and how it will be changed in terms of the types of companies, the location of those companies, and the size of those companies.
So I have a go at that. I mean, the current profile of companies coming through on growth coaching is getting smaller, and we're seeing that from the analysis. So one could argue that actually maybe they're not the right profile companies to create enough of the jobs if we continue on that journey, that trajectory. So so I think actually, yes, pivoting it slightly may well bring forward some of the bigger companies, as we've indicated. And I take your point about geography. We had key indicators in some parts of the contract. Whilst the whole performance contract is predicated on jobs and apprenticeships, there were some underlying key indicators, and some of those are in particular locations. So the inward investment does have some indicative numbers against districts, but it's actually quite hard to make things land where we think the company, we might think it would be a good fit in a particular place, but obviously a company has to be a fit for the company. So but they were only ever guide indicators, they were never hard targets. And I'll take your point about equity, because I'm sure there would be a draw towards Cambridge and lots of companies based in Cambridge, and we might miss the chance to support a Fenland company, for example. And we've always been mindful of that in the contract, and we've always been looking at performance in some of the outlying districts, and that won't change. We will still be driving to see investments happen there.
So before I bring Vic in, just one build on that is that, and this, I mean, we're talking still about the performance aspect of this rather than the proposed changes. So we'll hold off, I think, try and hold that bit of the discussion. But regardless of where in the geography this happens, it still feels to me that we should be really trying to focus on providing support where we can to those firms that have high growth potential and therefore can deliver most into the overall ambition for the region and GVA numbers. And that analysis of what's happening now, how any pivoting that we'll come to in a minute affects both the type of businesses we support, not just where they are, but the type of businesses they are, should be something we keep in mind. Because I think it does strike me that when you look at the thing in the round, there's a lot more lifestyle business support mixed in here, which, you know, is not without its merits, but it's not really where I think generally, if we're trying to put public funds in to support this, you should be trying to get something over and above that delivers you those wider sort of social, environmental, or economic benefits, which is something for, it's not really about the performance now, perhaps, but it's an important point for us going forward. I see nods as I was saying that, so I think people are probably in agreement. Vic, I'll bring you in.
Thank you. So I'm trying to follow this as best I can, and I want to be clear in my thinking. We've got areas that aren't doing as well as expected, so we're going to come up with some sort of plan of action, but we're currently discussing the performance of those areas. But some of these appear to me to be quite critical areas that we should be understanding fully the reasons why we're not able to hit our targets. And when we're looking at the coaching service, it does say under 3.6 that feedback from the market is that businesses currently do not want to buy coaching support, as it's not a priority for most businesses. So is that a change from when we first set this program out? Because if genuinely that statement's correct and the feedback from the market is substantial enough that we can rely on it, why are we even bothering to do this? If that, if genuinely we are now having to pour more money into this or more resource into this to achieve targets that actually aren't really that realistic, what are we doing about that? And is that part of the changes that are recommended? Because I noticed that, Nigel, you said that it's difficult, or maybe there'd be some contractual issues were we to start changing some of the different streams. So I suppose I'm just saying, if genuinely the market is saying we don't want coaching, why are we continuing with it?
I'll take that, Steve. I think it's probably, I think it's a question of there are some, it's not a 100% company saying we're not taking coaching. What we're finding is that the mix of companies taking coaching probably wasn't as it was hypothesized way back. So the mix, so what we're seeing is whereas before the hypotheses of the top 1,000 growth companies, that you were looking at companies that are going to be probably more at the top end of the SME, so more the 50 plus type SMEs. What we're seeing is the 3 to 9. And so with that comes it might be high growth in terms of where they're doubling their business, but in terms of true growth and absolute numbers, it's not particularly significant. Back to the point that Alex made, they're probably more lifestyle type businesses that are falling into the mix. So what has happened, I think, whether the original hypothesis was right about whether or not there are 1,000 high growth companies that set coaching, I think that is probably questionable looking back. And I think, to be fair to the folks that designed the program, the 5 service lines, it was always going to be unlikely that all 5 service lines hit the mark. So I think obviously there's a lot of learning, a lot of change that's taken place. I would like to reinforce the point that this is not about adding more money. It's about potentially what we're going to talk about next is how we just reallocate some of the funds to get the best return and to get us closer to the targets and the GVA and the economic growth that Alex was just talking about.
Nitin. So sorry, Vic, do you want to come back on that first, and I'll bring Nitin in, just if it's on that same point?
If that would be okay, I just want to simply say, okay, so anything we do that reduces the number of additional jobs we're creating, we need to, find a way of replacing those actions with something else. Is all I would like to just put a marker out, because I don't want to reduce the overall number of jobs we're creating. Of course not, none of us do. Sorry, that's my only response.
Just on that, sorry. Because I just wanted to talk earlier a little bit about the numbers, but just on Faye's point, we definitely are not going to change the numbers as we discussed last time, Nigel, didn't we? To say, the numbers that they have to achieve are what we all agreed in terms of the jobs, whether we shift around where, they come from. The only other thing I'd challenge us as well, everyone was getting very excited about inward investment, but then those guys are coming for the jobs that are the sort of talent of Cambridge. So are we actually creating a bit of a bigger hole for people locally trying to recruit as well? So I think we just need to be careful where they're going to land. And I know we can't always organize that, but there's lots of companies want to come to Cambridge for the right reasons. And that, to me, sometimes, and it's a consequence of where we are, I think, in terms of the numbers, but we just need to be careful that we don't, put more heat in an area that's already struggling to actually accommodate what it's doing itself. So we really got to be careful in what we sort of move to. But the numbers, as far as I've been involved, we're not planning to change. And I think myself, Steve and Nigel were quite clear about that.
I think that's right, Nitin. But Steve, Nigel, what do you want to confirm? I mean, no change to the overall objectives in terms of the targets.
No, as part of the proposal, there is a reduction being proposed in the overall target. And this is to reflect some of the partial underperformance that we've had thus far today. But also, we've obviously got to pivot and make changes. I mentioned about the ERDF project change request. There is some changes there, because that particular funding stream was all predicated on doing growth coaching, and if growth coaching isn't happening, we're going to pivot that. And so you lose one of your levers, if you like. So I think when you make several changes in a contract that we've agreed, there is going to be some impact. I mean, obviously, I'm entirely hoping that we will overshoot anyway, because hopefully, the changes we make will have the right effect, and we'll, as I said, we'll be seeking for value more than we've been looking for anyway out of some of the grant streams and equity to a degree. Just on Nitin's point about the skill side, the original plan was always that the skill, by putting things together like this, we would have a skills service, skills and a talent finding service working together with investment, so that actually it would become a holistic system, if you like, that we wouldn't just strangle our own existing businesses to bring in new. It was a supported process.
So, sorry, Steve, in terms of reducing the numbers of jobs, then will we be able to sort of measure the equivalence? Because I think you talked about growth. How do we do that? Because it is a contractual agreement in one sense, and I know we got to change because it isn't working, but how do we know what amount is the right amount?
There is, in the reporting pack, in the appendix, you'll see that they are reporting, but we'll be reporting on GVA being measured across all the actuals. So, and there is a target within the programme for GVA generated. So, we can measure it that way. So that's a measure of whether the quality of what was created was better than expected and the growth was better than expected at the end of the programme. And we've commissioned some analysis. Andy separately was interested in what's the trajectories of some of the businesses that have done coaching. What does that actually now look like? So the subcontractor is now undertaking some detailed analysis. Now we have a cohort that's been through it in the first year and is seeing the benefits of having been through the coaching and what's that done to their, because obviously they project, there's a forecast of what their growth will be at the start of doing the coaching, and then obviously go measure the actuals afterwards. So that bit of evaluation is going to be happening. We'll be sharing that analysis as we go forwards.
So let's come back on the inward investment, going back on the inward investment comments. I wouldn't want people leaving here with the idea that the pipeline we've got, which is a rich pipeline, I think of 260 companies, is all landing in Cambridge. It is a pretty broad geographical spread. Equally, I don't want to mislead people and say it's all landing in the Fens, because that's not the case either. But certainly we're seeing it pretty well spread across the region.
So Andy, welcome. Just to explain, we're on 3.1, as you would have guessed. We're specifically dealing with the performance part of the programme before moving on to the programme review. So we're in that first section. And there's been a series of questions before you joined around different aspects, but I'll come to you in a minute on questions you may have. But we're on that performance bit rather than on the programme review aspect. Mike.
Hi, just one clarification point. Just because companies are small doesn't make them lifestyle. They can be just in the earlier stage of their growth. And secondly, within changes in macroeconomic conditions, you get different companies that start to grow because their products are more suited to recession or more suited to things coming through. So one has to be careful in terms of just, it's almost like dismissing companies because they're less than 10 people.
Yeah, exactly. It was less than 10 people once upon a time. So yeah, sorry, Nigel, go on.
Yeah, I don't even suggest they weren't important, but it is an interesting fact that what we are seeing is coaching being taken up by those smaller companies. Not to say that they're all lifestyle businesses, far from the truth.
Andy.
Thank you. Apologies for arriving late. It was a sort of detailed question, Nigel, not for now, but it'd be really helpful to get a sense of, on the inward investment, the names of the companies, and you were talking about where they're geographically located. Where have they decided to go and base themselves? Because understanding which companies are coming in and where they are would be really helpful.
Yeah, we'll take that on board, Andy.
Great, thanks, Andy. Any other points and questions around the performance data? The one thing, Steve, I want to be really clear on, though, is that at the macro level, the targets we have for the programme should remain, and we might miss them, right? If things change, we might not deliver what we expected, but we're not reducing our targets because things have not entirely worked out the way we thought, right?
Well, no, we are proposing, because we're moving money out of growth coaching, we are adjusting the growth coaching target.
Sorry, I understand within the line, yeah, I get that. But the aim is that we repurpose in order to achieve the same overall economic growth outcomes through different utilisation of the funds.
Well, it is, but we are, one of the recommendations we are proposing is a 10% reduction because of all the changes we're making, and that's partly based on what Nigel mentioned, in the fact that, you know, we are going to change things with the contractor, so there is going to be some hiatus. So we're recognising that fact. I like I said, want to try and drive to the original target, but we're recognising that, you know, our contracts, we could say we'd do nothing and we'll fall way short.
Yeah. So there's two different things for me here. One is we might want to make a pragmatic decision in terms of what we're asking our contractor to deliver for us. Right, that's fine. But as a business board, in terms of the aim we have at the macro level to deliver the level of growth that we anticipate, my sense is we shouldn't reduce that target. And if what turns out is we end up missing what our original target was, we take that on the chin. But I mean, maybe I'm jumping into the programme review bit, so apologies for that. But I think it's important.
I think that's a very fair point, Nick. I think the recommendation comes because of the contract, because if you reduce funding from one of your high service lines, and they say, well, we can't hit that target, and unfortunately, the rest of them shouldn't. We'd be going to make up that gap. Nevertheless, I'm totally in alignment. We would keep the total program target as is for the business board communication plans.
Yeah.
But it'll be down to Steve to manage that through the contract.
Yeah.
On a contract basis.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. I think that's an important
one more point on that. Sorry. In terms of reducing the number, though, we've got to be careful. I mean, surely some element of this failure has got to be to the contractors as well. Or is it not? I don't know. Is our analysis telling us that we got it totally wrong and it's down to us?
It's not black and white enough to be able to make that accusation, Nitin.
Well, it's not accusation. All I'm saying is we need to be careful, because they did, go in with their eyes open.
Yeah, but I think that we obviously want to make this contract run to the last year, and I think what we don't have is enough evidence to say, are we happy with the performance of the subcontractor? Not entirely. Can we point our fingers to? I mean, as it stands at the moment, they are thereabouts on numbers. So they would have a counter argument. They say, why are you complaining? Because you're on, as far as we're concerned, we're on track. So we're into a debate about what the numbers, what the leading indicators are saying, as opposed to what the actual absolutes are saying. So that's the dilemma we face.
Let me bring Vic and then Belinda in, and then sorry, I know we should probably pause because it's my fault. We've started to migrate into the programme review and how we take the stuff forward. But let me bring Vic and Belinda in on this point, and then maybe I'll try and close off recommendation A in a minute. But Vic, over to you first.
I'll be really quick. I don't think we should be changing targets. We shouldn't worry about not meeting a target, but we should be honest and open about the fact we haven't met some targets. I completely agree. There's nothing at all wrong with going in and saying, actually, we didn't make it for these reasons. But what I don't like is an approach that says, well, let's change all the targets so it looks like we did deliver what we're supposed to. And hopefully I've misunderstood our intention there.
Yeah, that was one thing I wanted to clarify as well, Vic. It doesn't feel right. The overarching macro targets should be the ones we set, and if we don't hit them, we explain why we didn't hit them. Belinda.
Yeah, thank you. Just to build on Nitin's point, I'm going to be honest, 62% satisfaction is not blowing my hair back. If we want to deliver the best of business support and guidance to the fantastic businesses in this region, then I think 62% is a bar not to be satisfied with. So for me, and I understand
can I just interject? Sorry, the process we're using called Net Promoter Score, in their defence, the process we use, these scores are very high. Because the way it works, they're very high. They're one away from world class. So I'd be curious what number you'd want them to hit.
Well, I think given the conversation we've just had, regardless of what the calibration and standard curve of that metric and mechanism would be, I think we have there are a number of issues and we don't actually know what they are. But my personal view would be that we should aim and encourage our subcontractor to deliver the very best in class that there is. And if 62% we are going to be happy with, then I would suggest maybe we could set the bar a little higher and ensure that it's still a high quality provision.
Okay, well, Ted, I think actually what I see is actually a different issue, if I'm honest. It's not the actual score, it's actually the number of respondents we're getting for the score, which is it's not necessarily a reflection on the subcontractors themselves, but it's how, like for all surveys, getting enough respondents. But if you actually look at the numbers from a Net Promoter Score, they are close to world class. But that's not. I think we have a different issue there, quite frankly.
Possibly, but there is. Let's entertain the scenario that there might be people saying, "I had someone come in and they weren't fantastically brilliant," and they then talk to their mates. Just that, I think that has to be a hypothesis that we do consider.
Thanks, Belinda. Andy, do you want to come in?
I was just going to say, I mean, I'm with Nigel on my reaction to the Net Promoter Score was actually, they're not bad scores given that particular metric, Belinda, but the volume of people that we've got responses from is tiny. So I wouldn't read much into it, frankly.
Net Promoter Score is a bit of it's an awkward metric. We use it in the water industry as well. And the numbers are lower numbers are good compared to satisfaction levels. But anyway, that is the way it works. Okay, I'm going to attempt to move us on. And I mean, can we therefore, I'm looking at the recommendations, can we note that we've noted the performance data for the July to September 22 position? I'm assuming we've had a good run around that and we've seen the papers, so I'm thinking we're okay to note that, but shout if you differ, and that's all right. In which case, Steve, do you want to then turn to effectively the second part of the paper, which is around the programme review, which, thanks to poor chairing, we've already begun to talk about.
Yeah.
But do you want to think about that aspect?
You've very well covered a lot of it already. So as was noted, we undertook a review prompted by obviously Growth Code board, Nigel, and us as officers. So we looked. The review was prompted around concerns around those leading indicators and obviously the wider economic impacts that are going on at the moment and the general feedback, as has already been mentioned, we were getting. So the evaluation looked at material changes in macro-micro environments since inception and mobilisation, value of the performance of each service line since the contract start, and particularly in the last 6 months where we expected a significant ramp up, which just isn't necessarily happening at this point in the programme, and a re-evaluation of the original programme objectives and hypothesis against what we're seeing today. So, as is already mentioned, all service lines were scrutinised, and they were all expected to deliver a significant increase in performance over the summer during Q6 to Q8. And to date, the data from growth coaching and skills lines obviously demonstrate that's not materialised in reality, and the way it looks forward. In terms of I won't go through all the points on evidence that we've got in section 7 here. Obviously the board can read it, but in section 8 of the report, basically based on the evidence from the review and the forecast contracted outcomes, we obviously extrapolated out where we think the current performance might land. And we worked very closely with the prime contractor on this in terms of what they believed whether performance could be increased. They worked through contract change plans with the subcontractors over the summer for improvement plans in terms of performance, but as has been noted, this hasn't yielded what we want. So extrapolating data forward, there was some projections shown about where we will land with some of this if we do nothing. So based on the evidence that's set in section 7, we came forward with 6 recommendations to change things, and they are obviously increasing jobs created from the 3 million ERDF funded pot, current from 400 to 1200. Now this has to be done by taking a project change request to DLUC, which we are currently writing, and we're talking to DLUC about that. So that would change what that's focused on, and would be able to generate far more jobs than it's originally intentioned with growth coaching. The growth coaching service line would be reduced. So this is the number of interventions on growth coaching, but it can still, but not taking the service away, still delivering an additional 707 jobs on top of the jobs they've already created to date. But obviously reducing the growth coaching, we reallocate £500,000 from that particular funding line into, and its parallel 454 jobs that go with it, from the growth coaching to the inward investment service line. As has already been mentioned, the proposal was to reduce the 10% of jobs in the whole programme, and this is based on the facts that we've got non-performance, as Nishan had said, improvement plans haven't yielded the upturn. We also have the impacts from the macro environment, and obviously we'd be shifting around the activity, so there is an impact. But I do take on board the point about maybe we stick to the original and we just see where we land. Growth works with skills, as has already been mentioned. They've not been, their operating model has not really been working, and Felice may want to comment a bit more on this, but so we want to take on a different approach, strategic and operational approach to how that skills brokerage works, and we're recommending that that service pivots from focusing on long-term culture change with businesses and the ecosystem rather much more focused brokerage activity. So getting directly into the businesses and with the performance, with the college providers and other learning providers to deliver the key outputs. And also focus quite a lot on the skills side into filling vacancies, which has intensified. So we would be looking to there's structural change within the skills team, change the way they're set up. So that's the 6 changes. As I've already said, there's Appendix 4 shows a summary of the impact in terms of jobs on the report. And if we take action now, obviously, as has been mentioned, we've got 5 quarters to obviously try and align what it's delivering, and obviously, hopefully, truly reflect what can be delivered in the marketplace by the prime and subcontractors, and use the remaining budget in the best way. I'll stop there. If Nigel and Fliss want to add anything to that.
Nigel, Fliss, do you want to say anything else before I might make a comment, then I'll bring Andy in?
No, I think again, throw up the questions, Nick, and we go from there. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Nigel. Fliss, anything on the skills side you want to add?
I think there are 3 options that we're considering at the moment. The status quo isn't an option. So one is for the senior management team to be strengthened at Growth Works with Skills. we're looking at bringing in another provider, or we could bring it in-house. So we're just currently exploring 3 options, all of which are viable, all of which we can take forward. The preferred option is to bolster the team in GrowthWorks with skills. So that's currently where I'm focusing my efforts.
Okay, thanks, Fliss. So my point, going back to the point I made earlier, and Steve, you referenced it, is that I'm not comfortable with point 4 of the recommendations, that we sort of like give ourselves an easier target. It doesn't feel right. It feels like we should hold that as what we're going for. And at least at that macro level, that should be where we are. I understand the differences in the service line aspects as we pivot, because obviously things change if you're making a conscious decision. But on that point, I where I am at least is not to support that recommendation 4 of your 6. But I'm all right with the others. But Andy, I'll come to you now.
Yeah, it was a factual question about Steve. You said, when you were saying we did the review, who's we in this context?
So it was the senior responsible officers within CPCA and the prime contractor. We worked together just to review where we're at in the programme.
Do we need to, and I'm not sure what point in the process it's right, but do we need an independent review of this programme? I mean, this is the kind of thing that that I'll be referring to internal audit and just go and independently have a look at what's going on, what's working, what's not working, and what we can learn from it. Now, the danger of doing it now, you've just done the review, so you don't want to do another one now, but if you leave it too long, then we end up with some lessons right at the end when the contract's coming to an end. But I think there's a question for you and colleagues just to think about how you get a genuinely independent review of what is happening in GrowthWorks.
Yeah, we are. So thanks, Andy. We are discussing about evaluation of the programme, and obviously there could be a point where you say, well, you wait to the end. But we're beginning to conclude that actually it might be something we will start early, and potentially it could include, and we would invite someone to do that who's independent, external. So I think that's something we will bring in, and I think it would be good to do that as we conclude the calendar year 2. I think we could review that with an starting evaluation processes and continue it until the end of the programme and beyond.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Steve. I've got Tina, then Rebecca, then Mike. Tina first.
I was just going to say, and Fliss did allude to it. Maybe the answer is going to other, I don't know it's the entire answer, but going to other providers. So looking more broadly at this, because clearly what we're doing is not working in various ways, and there must be people out there who we could use who are likely to, you could look at their track record and they're likely to come up with something additive.
Yeah, we did consider that in discussions. As Nigel has alluded to, though, there are contract penalties built in with this. So if we consciously decide to make a switch to a new provider, we almost certainly would lose some of the funds within the programme in terms of financial penalties. So that's the trade-off by doing that. But it's obviously an option. And there's a complete failure on performance would definitely trigger, that as a potential option. But we're not at that stage yet, of course.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. But those things are all feasible for us to consider. I mean, of course, in some instances here, you're looking at, our estimate is that there's actually insufficient demand. So a different provider wouldn't necessarily change that particular aspect. Some areas it might be different, but it's something we can always look at. But there are consequences of switching, which we would be aware of. Okay. Rebecca.
Yeah, thanks. I've got a couple of comments. The first one is I entirely agree with Alex and others around the not reducing the 10%. I think we should stick with the original and look at the reasons why. And the reasons why kind of interest me because we've talked around this quite a lot, but it's very much in the context of this project and hitting the numbers at the end of next year. And I'm kind of struck by the comment that Nigel made around, the current businesses are the 3 to 9s. And I've got no sense of whether they're the 3 to 9s now, but they might be the larger end of the SMEs in a couple of years, and then they might be the real growth companies in a few years' time. And I'm just a bit concerned that we're looking at this in what is quite a short-term sense of this project, rather than what is good for the area and the business and the economy in a longer-term sense. And I wouldn't want us to, while on the one hand it seems a kind of a superficial reshuffling of the numbers doesn't seem too concerning. Actually, if we're going to stop doing something, or we're going to change the way we've done it because we haven't had favourable results, what is that going to mean for the longer term? And have we thought about that in a kind of more holistic way? A bit like when we first put this programme together, we didn't start with that. We started with, what is right for the area and what is right that we should be aiming towards. So I suppose I'm asking to be reassured that we've had to think about that, and that we've thought about that a bit more longer term, rather than looking at this project and the numbers involved and how we sort of hit the mark.
No, that's a really good comment. Thank you, Rebecca. And I agree with you about the longer term point, because I was actually thinking about what comes next after GrowthWorks. And to my point about the monitoring doesn't just stop at the end of this programme. We will be looking to monitor well beyond it, the impact that we've had. So I think there's a few things which the business board, with its recycled money, dare I say it, needs to think about, well, what comes next in terms of business support, delivery and all of that. That's a whole discussion in itself, and a strategy and a plan. I think the analysis we've asked the subcontractors to do on the current companies who've been through coaching and their growth trajectories is the really useful stuff, I think, because I think if we can get evidence from there that shows we have, a level of cohort of companies that actually are now saying they are going on for bigger and better things, then we know the project is doing what it was meant to do. And we obviously need to keep focused and continue tracking those. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd add, I think it's a very good point you make, in that there's no question that the nature of the contract drives some of the behaviour. With the PMO that runs it as well, because that's the way the contract's geared. So you could argue about whether that's the right thing to do in the first place, but I think there's certainly a balancing act between the two, because there are some of the original hypotheses that may not be achievable in 3 years, but if you look over a longer period of time, and I think skills is a very good example of this. If you look at what the skills offer is, which is about long-term key account management and proper planning over a longer period of time, then that's got a lot of value to it. But what we do know is that approach won't deliver those numbers in the short term. So that's this ongoing trade-off.
Thanks, Nigel. Mike, I'll come to you.
Just a thought really, in terms of, yes, it's one thing looking at the overall jobs target, the 10%, but I'm conscious that we have a number of individual contracts with funding sources, and the contract management of that. If we underperform, I know ERDF is a particular one. You don't want to come in at the last minute and say, oh no, we've underperformed. It's a question of managing the process of saying, this is what we predict will be happening over the next few months.
Steve, is that one for you to pick up on?
Yeah, it is. No, you're absolutely right. The ESF and the ERDF, obviously, we are only programmed to draw the funding we've been awarded, and we have to follow that or try and aim to achieve that profile. Otherwise, we don't get the money. And hence why one of the recommendations is about a project change request, which we are working on and talking to DLUC about anyway, to help enable that process of hitting that. So yeah, there are key deadlines that drive using the money up. And I don't think any of us want to send the money back to Europe by the end of the programme. So, you know, that's one aspect of this.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Steve. But Mike, it's a good point, and the keeping everyone abreast so there's no surprises is definitely the best way to manage any of these kind of funds, really. I think we may have exhausted comments on this. It's been an interesting and important discussion. Just before we move to recommendations B and C, I think, Steve, there's a number of points that came up in the discussion which are really helpful and will hopefully be points that can be taken on board as you're moving the work forward here. There's also the point Andy made about the independent review, which you picked up, and that's a sort of separate point for us to make sure we don't lose sight of here. And I think, looking at the views of colleagues around the room, that my point about not wishing to endorse point 4 of the proposed recommendations in section 5 is where the balance of opinion in the board is. I'm seeing various people sort of giving me thumbs up and nods. Can I just check if anyone disagrees with that point? I can't see any dissent. So that in then taking forward the recommendations, so noting the outcomes and findings of the programme review, I'm assuming we can all do. So again, let me know if you disagree with that noting. And then the endorsement is yes, but not point 4, where we would retain our original target. And is everyone happy with that too?
Yeah, can I just interrupt? Sorry,
Please do.
Can I just as a reminder that this paper was taken to Skills Committee where the recommendations were approved. So here, the Business Board is asked to endorse these recommendations. So as you've pointed out, we can amend this now to confirm that you're happy to endorse the other points except for point 4. And so when Steve takes the paper forward to the CA board, he will, Steve, you'll have to sort of let the CA board know that that particular recommendation was not endorsed. So if we just draft some wording for you, and then can we come back to the amended wording in, after the next item, just so that everyone's happy with it?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Rena. And then that makes sense. So that also allows me to then convey that when we get to the item on the Combined Authority Board accurately.
Okay. All right. Okay. Just give.
I think that I would say that, so that would make sense. But I would say that the macro level target position, it feels like that's an issue the Business Board should take a view on and has taken a view on, so we can capture that, and obviously we can then have the debate at the Combined Authority Board with the wording capturing it as you've just suggested. So Rena, just to check, were you going to suggest we come back to that before the end of this meeting?
Well, I've drafted something, Nick. Well, just amend it slightly, and then we can just come back and just let you know what this is the amended wording, and if you could all agree that you're happy with it. So that just.
So do you want to do that by correspondence? Do you want to do that by correspondence?
We could do it. We could do it now, whilst you guys are, moving on to the next item, if that's okay. Or do you, or would you?
Let's see how we go. I'm conscious we've only got 45 minutes left, and if it ends up being a long, people trying to tweak the wording,
it won't be. It's literally tweaking a wording. Yeah. So I'll come back to you after the next item. Is that okay? That's
fine, Rena. Thanks very much.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Nigel, as well. It's really helpful. So I think it takes on to item 3.2, which is around the Employment Skills Strategy Implementation Plan. Both this and the next one will be with you, Fliss, and I think both have already been through the Skills Committee, but I'll hand over to you to talk about both of these.
Brilliant, thank you. And again, apologies, I'm going to keep my camera off just in the hope that you hear the audio. Conscious of time, so I won't spend too long on these, but you will recall the Employment and Skills Strategy was unanimously approved in January at the Combined Authority Board, and you've also had sight of it here at the Business Board. In September, I took this implementation plan to the Skills Committee, and again, it was unanimously endorsed. Some key points to note. This strategy is looking at 4 different groups of stakeholders. Normally it's just 3, so we've added on, making sure that we're engaging with individuals who will be the recipients of learning as well. And we have those 4 core themes of which we are prioritising all our work and investment, which is pre-work learning and formal education, employer access to talent, life-wide and life lifelong learning and also support into and between work. One of the things that's different about the employment and skills strategy is rather than just looking at short-term priorities, we're also looking at those longer-term outcomes, recognising that there are inherent and systemic problems within the skills system which short-term fixes really won't change. Within the implementation plan, just a couple of points to note which have, I guess, have changed and have a slight delay. So you'll see a proposed governance structure which looks quite complex. We are taking that forward as part of the wider governance review at the Combined Authority. So whilst that said that we would have that in place, that's going to take slightly longer. And then we're working very closely with Vic as well within the development of the LSIP to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, but totally aligning it in the work that we're taking forward. And then also in the implementation plan, there's talk of us having an investment framework. Again, this is something that is being considered in the wider Combined Authority. So whilst the date has gone, it's not that we've been resting on our laurels, it's just that we're trying to align the wider work within the Combined Authority. So I'm not going to go into any more detail, but happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Fliss. Any questions for Fliss on this item? You've been admirably clear in your description, Fliss, and the paper's well written. I mean, it's a straightforward recommendation on this one. It's just to endorse the implementation plan. Certainly, having read it, thought it was a good piece of work, and I'm very happy to. Is it everybody in the set of the same view? Yeah, I've got nods and thumbs ups and things, so that's all really good. Thank you very much. So, Fliss, do you want to take us on to the local skills improvement plan, item 3.3?
I will do, yes. So Vic, feel free to chip in here as well. I know you said that you might have to remove yourself from the conversation. So LSIPs are something that are derived from the Skills for Jobs white paper and have subsequently become in statute. And this is really changing the skills landscape for post-16 technical education. So we now have LSIPs, which are local skills improvement plans, which are all led by, sorry, I'll speak in acronyms, I'll try and say it out loud first. So employer representative bodies, so ERBs, and within the Combined Authority area, Vic has been successful in his expression of interest to the Department for Education, and so the Cambridgeshire Chamber of Commerce are leading on our LSIP. Some of the points to note are that it will change the way in which colleges will engage, and they will have to have annual accountability statements which are signed off by the LSIP, so therefore the Chamber in our instance. The heart of the LSIP is trying to get employer voice more firmly embedded within the skills landscape, which is totally a good thing to do. And what we're doing is working quite closely with Vic, and a member of my team has seconded to the Chamber on a day a week to make sure that we align all of the work that we commission to the work that's being taken forward in the LSIP. There are some technical bits and pieces within the paper which I won't cover over, but again, happy to take any questions. A couple of things, I guess, which I should say is that I, and also Al Kingsley, who is obviously a member of the business board, but also the chair of our employment and skills board, is also on the LSIP advisory group. So both Al and I are very linked in with the work that Vic's taken forward.
Great, thanks, Fliss. And that point about ensuring the employer voice is embedded and central to the way these things work is such a key point, and I'm assuming was part of the reason why Vic's bid was successful, because it was explaining how it would, how the chambers would help to achieve that. Has anyone got any questions and issues around this? And obviously, this is at this stage just to note the progress here. But I've got no one signalling. Fliss, you shouldn't say this as any lack of interest in these issues. We are really interested in them. I think it's just that it's pretty clear what you're doing is sensible and good. And on this one in particular, I suspect it will be useful to come back once you've evolved it a stage further. So I think we're all happy to note it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. that takes us on to 3.4. And as I said at the beginning of the meeting, I have had an indication that people want to move into private session to discuss aspects that are in the exempt appendix, which, as I said before, is exempt from publication under Part 1 of 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, as it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed because it relates to the financial or business affairs of a particular person, including the authority holding that information. Now, Rena, do you want to come in on this item, or do you want to come back to our previous item first?
Just before you deal with this one, because it's going to go into exempt session, we've Nick and I have drafted some wording. So if we could just deal with that, then you've sort of
do you want to take us through that then, Rena, and we can hopefully deal with that.
So for Part C, we've amended it to read that you'd endorse the proposed recommendations 1, 2, 3, 5, and 6 from the programme review as set out in section 5 of this report, and then to include a point D, which would be not to endorse the proposed recommendation 4.
Yes, I think that deals with it. Steve, does that work for you?
Sorry, yeah, it does. Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah,
the correct capture is. Can I check business board members are happy? Again, shout if you're not. Yeah, everyone's content. So really, if we can conclude that's helpful. Thank you.
If you could get somebody to propose and second.
Okay. Right. So will somebody? Vic's proposing it. Thank you very much. Will somebody second for me? Don't be shy. Oh, thanks, Andy. Sorry, you're on the second screen. I couldn't see you waving vigorously until I switched. So I have a proposer and a seconder, Rena, from Vic and Andy, and we can take that as agreed.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Just before we go into private session, I wonder whether what we could do with item 3.4, and Rachel, I'll take a steer from you, is that recommendation A, which is about the progress on the development and opening operation of phase 1, is probably something we can deal with because that doesn't require us to consider the items in the exempt appendix. But Rachel, do you want to just, any views from you on that? Because we could potentially deal with point A and then go into exempt session for the rest. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably helpful, as we did in the skills committee, just to kind of do the general update around the university, which isn't obviously subject to exemption. So yeah.
So do you want to do that, and then perhaps we can deal with point A, then we'll park the rest for exempt session, and then we'll just do the remaining items of the agenda before we go into closed session. So I'll hand over to you, Rachel, to pick up on this.
Lovely, thank you. So the purpose of the report today is to provide members of the business board with an update to the new university in Peterborough, which has been a key project for the combined authority since 2019, and a huge amount has been achieved since then. So to summarise the report, ARU Peterborough are now teaching its first students. The R&D building is due for practical completion in December, and the delivery of the second teaching building is in the pipeline. So the overarching view of the new university from the wider community is hugely positive, and the partners continue to believe that it will be an ongoing catalyst for growth and development in Peterborough. However, whilst it's necessary to celebrate the success, it's also acknowledged that in hindsight, the monitoring and reviewing of the original projections and the quantitative objectives of the university were perhaps not sufficiently developed enough at the time when the original FBC was presented back in 2019. So the key question of how we continue to monitor the success of the new university needs to be determined and agreed by all the partners involved. So through further work, it's proposed that as part of the role of the combined authority, we should continue to work with the university partners to revisit the original quantitative objectives of the phase 1 full business case, with a further review about how to reset these for the effective monitoring of the new university. So it's proposed, included in the paper, that we do this alongside the full business case for the second teaching building, which is due for review and resubmission to the Combined Authority Board well, the Skills Committee and Business Board, and then the Combined Authority Board in January. And then shortly after this, in early 2023, obviously subject to a successful town planning approval for the second teaching building for the university, the partners will start to prepare the campus outline planning application, which will set out the university's future potential ambition. And then later in 2023, we propose to prepare a further update for members, including a partner strategy for the University of Peterborough, too many P's, programme business case. So hopefully that covers in brief the report. Happy to take any questions if anyone's got any at this point.
Thanks, Rachel. So anything on the generic points in the report that we can deal with still in open session? Andy?
First, it's amazing you got open on time, particularly lots of students about to arrive. Does it imply that you've got about 1,000 students rather than 2,000? Comment on that. And then secondly, well, what does that mean in terms of attracting people? But secondly, does that impact your revenues? What impact does that have on the ability for the university to operate? Because presumably it's not as efficient with those fewer number of students.
The operational aspect of the university, based on the intake for September of this year, isn't having a revenue operational impact on the university, because ARU are essentially supporting ARU Peterborough as part of its commitment to the university, and have stated that commitment will continue. So no, it doesn't affect the operational and management of the university at this point. It's probably also worth mentioning that there will be hopefully an additional intake in January as well. So the intake for this year's numbers aren't yet fully confirmed until sort of January. But yes, it does reflect the position that the original business case, setting out 2,000 students in September 2022, which is this year, has not been achieved. And so what we need to do is have a bit of time to reflect on that and kind of consider what is sensible and what is a reasonable way to determine what the successful outcomes of a university should be. Obviously, student numbers is part of that, but we need time to reflect on that now that the university is open and up and running.
Just one rider from me to Andy's point there, Rachel, is if we look at comparator new universities, what is their, do we know what their kind of year one performance has been in terms of student numbers?
No, we don't, and that's the work that we need to undertake between now and January, when we do when we present an update with the FBC for phase 3. Now we've got a working group together with the 3 partners, so ARU, PCC. We've also got a bit of additional support through a consultant that is working for the Combined Authority. So that's what we plan to do, as a means to try and help identify what those comparators should be.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Andy, does that pick up your points?
For now, yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other points on what Rachel's led for us on? If not, I'll try and just cover off that first point, as I said, which is point A, which is we note the progress on the development of the University of Peterborough, the opening and operation of phase 1 building to students, and its initial and potential performance against the original business plan objectives. So if we're happy to note those, taking on board the points that Andy's just made, then we can deal with that aspect, and everyone, I think, is content. So that's good. I think we need to stop there, because the other items under B are going to be subject to discussion where we need to go into the details of the exempt appendix. So we'll deal with that in closed session in a moment. I think just to finalise the agenda items, 4.1 is sort of headlines for the Combined Authority. I'll pick up the fact that we've rejected the programme change request from South Fens Business Park as our decision earlier on. I'll pick up the fact that as we look at the use of recycled local growth funds and enterprise zone funds, we'll be making sure that we consider that at the next business board meeting, and our objectives linked to the economic growth strategy and implementation plan. Note the fact we've endorsed the skills items that Fliss took us through, and then this item obviously would depend on where we get to under closed session. Those are probably some of my headlines from this, and then also to reflect the discussion we've just had around the wider set of issues on the GrowthWorks programme, utilising the wording that Rena kind of ran us through for a change to the recommendation, picking up that point on the 4th bullet. So those are the things I'll probably bring out in my chair's sort of summary for the Combined Authority board meeting at the end of the month, unless anybody wants to throw anything else into the mix.
Chair, can I just add that we've got the equity full business case for the Gainshare Equity Fund. The full business case wasn't ready in time for publication of papers for this meeting because it went through the internal performance and risk committee, but it has been approved now, and I'm going to circulate after this meeting by email procedures that particular full business case, and just what I'm seeking is just the endorsement of members. It's going directly to the Combined Authority Board at the end of the month on the 30th November, and it is the Combined Authority's Gainshare money, so it's right. They're going to make a decision on whether to a final approval of the full business case, but I wanted to get the endorsement of the business board as well, so I'll be sharing that round. Hoping
so, Steve, whatever comes through in responses to your email circulation, I would add to my update on the business board views into the Combined Authority meeting on the 30th, I guess.
Yes, although it is tabled as a separate item on the agenda at the CA board. So okay. I think it would be better if, you know, it's whatever the business board reflects here that you're able to, as a member of the CA board, bring into that discussion of that particular item, and obviously I'll be able to write into the paper that it was endorsed. So
okay, thanks, Steve. So we'll look out for a note from you later today. I think just this is 4.2, the forward plan. Dom, that's in the pack and people have a chance to look at it. Is there anything you want to bring out particularly in relation to it?
Nothing really to add. We're starting just to notify the board. We are looking to streamline and focus the agendas going forward. So we only bring in those items that are really there for wider discussion and decision or endorsement. So we want to utilise the other informal meeting where we get together in the off month. So we're looking at that agenda a bit more useful in terms of and beneficial in terms of really providing updates to the business board, but also to give you more of a heads up in terms of what's coming to the board. So you've got that insight, and that gives for better discussions and more focused discussions at this board, in this platform.
Yeah, thanks, Dom. I think it also is a means of ensuring that where we've identified things we know we need to do, as we've done during this meeting, we capture that in the forward plan as well. So that's a critical part of it for me. Any other comments on the forward plan from colleagues? No, okay. In which case, sorry, go on.
I just noted in terms of the growth company business plan coming forward in January. Yes. And I wondered how that sort of interfaced with the things we're talking about in terms of GrowthWorks. Is that just covering GrowthWorks, or does it cover other things?
I don't know if you want to take that, Dom, but as far as I know, it should be CA board first, because the CA board is the shareholder in the growth company. So I'm not sure it should be tabled to come in January, actually, but the two do interrelate, because everything, the mission, the mission of growth company is purely to deliver the GrowthWorks contract.
And really, just that's why I was wondering if we've got obviously a business plan for next year to be reviewed in January. Are we going to see it first, or when's that going to be assessed?
Well, as I say, I think we need to check, because it's the CA board that's the shareholder in the growth company, and I'm not sure. I think it should be approved there first by the directors in Growth Code before it comes to business board. So I just need to check the chronology of that, if I may, Mike. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I think we did make the amendment, but it hasn't obviously reflected in the latest version of the forward plan. But we'll double check.
Sounds like, well, okay, we'll double check, come back to that and amend the forward plan as needed. Any other comments before I suggest we close live streaming and go into private session? So Nick, can you confirm that when we're out of private session, I'll move into back to item